howling had stopped. That silence, cold and absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was waiting. I stood frozen in the darkness, my breath ragged, heart hammering against my ribs like a desperate prisoner. Every muscle tensed, every nerve screaming that they were near. They only howl when they hunt, I told myself. That silence means they're close. My hands trembled, fingers gripping the worn stock of my rifle so tightly my knuckles turned white. And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, tired and resigned, "Just let it be fast." 30 hours ago, I thought I could find peace out here. Just me, my rifle, and the woods. The engine hummed steadily beneath me as I drove deeper into the mountains of New England. A place where roads turned to dirt and silence stretched out like a living thing. My name is Jack Harrow, 42, long-haul trucker by trade, now on a rare vacation, chasing something simple. Peace. Nothing fancy. No city noise, no crowds. Just me in the open woods. In the cab of my pickup, everything was packed with a kind of meticulous ease born of habit. My Remington hunting rifle leaned against the seat, solid and familiar, its worn wood grip comforting under my fingertips. My backpack sat strapped down behind, loaded with essentials. A sharp hunting knife strapped inside its sheath, a metal flask filled with water, a headlamp clipped to the strap, a portable power bank tucked in a side pocket, an old compass dangling from a carabiner, and enough food for 3 days, jerky, canned beans, and a couple of energy bars. I trusted my gear like I trusted my own hands. It was all I needed. The road stretched out ahead, mostly gravel now, winding through thick forests that whispered ancient secrets with every breeze. This wasn't just a trip. It was a journey back to something I'd lost long ago. To myself. Inside me was a heavy kind of tired. Not the kind that goes away with sleep, but the kind that settles deep, like a shadow you can't shake. I wasn't running from anything, not the law, not debts, not mistakes. I was running to something quieter, a place where the noise inside me might finally hush. The GPS in my dashboard blinked steady, the signal solid. No glitches, no interference. The highway had thinned out to nearly nothing, and the cars behind me were gone, swallowed by the morning mist. The trees thickened, their branches reaching like dark fingers over the narrow road. The silence outside grew denser with every mile. I flipped the radio off. Static and distant voices no longer interested me. The hum of the engine was enough. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Empty road behind me. The kind of empty that felt like a promise. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself a slow breath. The kind that comes from knowing you've left the world you know behind, even if just for a while. This was my refuge. Here, I could finally hear the sound I'd been chasing. The sound of my own breath, my own heartbeat. And maybe, just maybe, a little peace. I pulled the truck off the gravel road onto a narrow dirt shoulder where the asphalt gave way to mud and fallen leaves. The tires sank slightly, leaving fresh tracks that disappeared quickly beneath the forest floor's natural litter. This was where the road ended and the wild began. I killed the engine, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were distant bird song and the soft rustling of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. I stepped out, feeling the cool morning press against my skin. My boots crunched softly on the dirt as I grabbed my gear. I slipped my jacket over my shoulders, rugged, well-worn, perfect for long days in the woods. My pack settled heavy and familiar on my back, and I swung my rifle over one shoulder, the weight steady and reassuring. I was no stranger to this life. The forest welcomed me with open arms. Sunlight filtering through a canopy of leaves, dappled light dancing on moss-covered trunks. I could feel the quiet pulse of the woods, a steady heartbeat beneath the surface. The first hours passed in a gentle harmony. The soft calls of birds, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, the clean taste of fresh air. Confident in my skills, I pulled out my hunting knife and marked several trees along the trail. Slashes in the bark, precise and intentional. Breadcrumbs to find my way back. This was survival. This was respect. I wasn't about to get lost out here. But as the sun climbed, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The GPS, once reliable, flickered uncertainly on the screen. The blue dot wavered, spinning in place. The signal weakened and then died altogether. I tapped the screen, cursed softly, then stuffed the device back into my pocket. That's when I heard it, a soft crunch behind me. Branches breaking underfoot, footsteps, slow, careful. I froze, muscles tightening, eyes darting to the thick underbrush. "Hello?" I called softly, my voice nearly swallowed by the forest. Nothing. I turned slowly, scanning the shadows, but no one emerged. Just the whisper of the wind, threading through the trees. Shrugging off the sudden chill, I pressed on. Then, something caught my eye. A flash of red tangled in the branches, a ragged cloth, worn and faded, fluttering like a warning. I approached cautiously. It wasn't mine. No idea whose it was, but it didn't belong here. I pulled the cloth free, watching it fall limp in my hands. A knot of unease twisted in my gut. This was no longer just a simple walk in the woods. Something else was watching. I decided not to turn back just yet. There were still a couple of hours before dark, and the thought of retreating to the road felt like surrender. This was why I'd come. To be out here, alone, to hear something other than the endless drone of the highway or the chatter of strangers. I found a small clearing sheltered by towering pines and firs. The ground was damp but flat enough. Unpacking my single-layer tent, I wrestled it into shape, securing the stakes in the soft earth. It was nothing fancy, a simple shell against the elements. But it was home for the night. Next came the fire. I gathered dry twigs and small branches, careful to avoid the soaked wood all around. Sparks flew when the lighter struck, and soon a modest flame crackled and danced, casting wavering shadows around the perimeter. I sat back and pulled out my dinner. Canned beans warmed on the fire, a couple of protein bars, and water from the flask. It wasn't much, but it filled the emptiness gnawing in my stomach. I checked my phone, hoping to get a signal, but the screen was dim. The battery icon blinked red. Of course. To make things worse, the power bank tucked in my pack had been compromised. Water had seeped in during the hike, rendering it useless. No lifeline now. As the daylight faded, a chill settled over the woods. The wind began to rise, rattling the tree branches overhead, carrying with it a low, haunting howl from far beyond. Wolves. The sound wasn't close, not yet, but it was unmistakable. A long, mournful cry that echoed across the hills, threading through the trees. I felt no fear. My rifle lay within arm's reach, resting against a log near the tent. I was semi-dressed for the night, jacket off but pants and boots still on. The hunting knife was clipped to my belt, just as it always was. I thought about those wolves out there, outnumbering me. But I trusted my instincts and my gear. Wolves were part of the wild, dangerous, yeah, but predictable. The real threat was the unpredictability of people. I shook my head, a faint smirk crossing my lips as I settled into my sleeping bag. Fuck the wolves, I thought. People are scarier. And with that, I let the fire's warmth lull me to sleep, unaware of what was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the night to fully fall. Morning came soaked and gray, the forest dripping with yesterday's rain and a heavy mist that clung to the trees like a shroud. The air was thick and cool, smelling of wet earth and pine needles, the kind of dampness that seeps into your bones. I unzipped the tent, stepping out into a world muted by moisture. Every leaf, every branch glistened with droplets, reflecting the weak light filtering through the dense canopy. I pulled out my compass, hoping for some sense of direction, but the needle spun wildly, as if it had lost all meaning. The forest around me seemed alive, but not in a comforting way. It twisted and shifted, like it wanted to confuse me, to keep me here. I should have known this wouldn't be a simple trip. I shouldn't have trusted the compass to guide me back to the truck. But I was stubborn, and stubborn sometimes gets you lost. I pushed forward, following what I thought was the path back. The ground was soft beneath my boots, the moss thick and springy. Mist curled around my ankles, swallowing my footprints quickly, erasing any sign I had been there. After what felt like an hour, I realized I was still in the same hollow where I'd camped. The trees arched overhead in familiar patterns, the moss-covered stones scattered just as before. The forest had led me back to where I'd started, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, laughing quietly. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, cold and sudden. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept moving, hoping the storm wouldn't last. But the rain didn't just fall, it hammered down. The sky darkened, and then hailstones clattered against leaves and bark like tiny stones. Each impact was a sharp reminder. I was alone here, at the mercy of the elements. I didn't panic. I couldn't. Not yet. Years on the road and countless nights in unpredictable weather had taught me to keep my head, no matter how bad it got. I trudged deeper into the forest, my boots squelching in the mud, water soaking through my sleeves. I kept scanning the gloom for any sign of shelter, any indication of the way out. Then, through the curtain of rain and mist, a faint glow flickered. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the light, a reflection from wet leaves or a passing firefly. But it stayed, steady and warm, pulsing softly between the trees like a distant candle. My heart skipped. I whispered under my breath, "No way. There shouldn't be anything out here." The glow grew stronger as I moved toward it, weaving carefully between trunks and branches slick with rain. The forest seemed to hold its breath as I approached. And then, standing clear in the undergrowth, a small cabin. Its windows flickered with the soft amber light of a lamp, smoke curling lazily from a crooked chimney. This place shouldn't exist here. Not in the middle of nowhere, with no road, no trail leading to it. Yet here it was, a beacon in the dark. The cabin was small but sturdy, built of thick, weathered logs stacked with care. Its roof sagged just slightly under the weight of years, and the windows were shuttered with rough planks. but the faint glow of lamplight spilled from beneath the door, cutting through the dusk like a promise. It was a strange sight. A warm beacon standing alone in the wild woods, seemingly untouched by time, yet oddly out of place. I approached cautiously, boots sinking into the muddy earth. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the dampness clung to my jacket and hair. My breath came in shallow clouds, mingling with the mist that hugged the ground. The door creaked open before I could knock. An old man stood in the doorway, holding an oil lamp whose flickering flame cast deep shadows across his weathered face. His eyes were sharp, calm, and somehow knowing, as if he'd been expecting me all along.
"You look cold. Come in,"
he said softly, voice gravelly but kind.
"Tea's just about ready."
There was no hesitation in his invitation, and against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The warmth hit me immediately, dry heat from a crackling fire, mingled with the earthy scent of wood smoke and something faintly herbal. The cabin was small but orderly. A table sat near the hearth, laden with a steaming pot of porridge and a worn teapot. I set my soaked pack down and looked around. Despite its age, the place was remarkably clean. No dust or cobwebs, no signs of recent neglect. But there was something unsettling about the silence, an absence of life that felt too deliberate. I caught the old man's eye and nodded toward my rifle, resting against the doorframe. Without a word, I eased it down carefully and leaned it there. It was a gesture of trust and respect for the unspoken rules of this place. He gave a slow nod, approving.
"Good,"
he murmured.
"Best to keep it close, but never too close."
I sank into a creaking wooden chair, rubbing the chill from my hands. The old man moved toward the fire, stirring the porridge gently. The spoon clinked softly against the pot, breaking the silence like a whispered warning. He glanced at me, then said,
"You're far from home, traveler. These woods aren't kind to those who linger."
I swallowed, feeling the weight of the room pressing in. The fire's warmth did little to thaw the chill settling deep inside me. "Where are we?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he poured tea into a chipped cup and handed it to me.
"Here,
He said simply.
where the forest remembers."
As I sipped the bitter brew, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stepped into a place where time stood still. Or worse, a place that existed outside of time altogether. The old man's eyes never left mine, calm and patient, like a hunter watching prey. And somewhere beyond the cabin walls, the rain continued to fall, soft at first, then heavy again, tapping against the windows like fingers knocking on a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits across the rough wooden walls of the cabin. Outside, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle, its rhythmic tapping against the roof a soft backdrop to the quiet room. I sat across from the old man, Elijah, I learned his name was, who stirred his bowl of porridge with a deliberate patience, eyes never leaving the fire. His presence was oddly calming, but beneath that calm lay something darker, something ancient. He spoke slowly, each word measured as though he was choosing them from a deep well of memory.
"I've been here a long time,"
Elijah began, his voice gravelly but steady.
"long enough to know the forest and its ways."
I nodded, though unease coiled tighter in my chest. There was something about the way he said it, like the forest wasn't just a place, but a living thing. Something that watched, remembered, and judged.
"The wolves,"
He said, his gaze lifting from the fire to meet mine.
They're not just beasts out there. They're the forest's guardians, its messengers. I'm on familiar terms with them. We're on you might say.
I swallowed hard. The firelight flickered, and I caught the faintest glint in his eyes. A knowing that unsettled me.
The forest takes,
He continued.
but it doesn't take everyone. Only those who don't leave when they should. Only those who stay too long, who forget the balance.
His words hung heavy in the air, wrapping around me like the smoke from the fire. I felt the weight of that balance, though I didn't yet understand its full meaning. I tried to mask my growing anxiety with a dry chuckle. Sounds like you've got quite the relationship with your friends out there. Elijah smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was thin and sharp, like a blade glinting in the firelight.
They won't come tonight.
He said softly.
Not yet.
The phrase was simple, but it sent a ripple through the room, a warning disguised as reassurance. I shifted in my chair, eyes flicking toward the window. The woods outside were alive with movement, shadows shifting, branches brushing against each other, the faint sound of something moving just beyond sight. A low murmur rose from the depths of the forest, distant howls weaving through the trees, a haunting chorus that stirred something primal inside me. I clenched my fists, gripping the edges of the table. Why are you telling me all this? Elijah's gaze was steady.
Because you need to understand what you're in.
The fire sputtered, sparks flying upward before vanishing into the chimney's dark throat. The room felt smaller, the silence stretching between us, punctuated only by the crackling flames and the persistent drizzle outside. I swallowed, the taste of the bitter tea lingering on my tongue. This wasn't a story I'd heard before. It was a warning. The old man's eyes softened for a moment, but his voice remained firm.
You think you came here by chance? That you're just a traveler passing through?
I shook my head, feeling the truth of his words settle in my gut.
No,
He said.
you came here because the forest called. Because this place remembers.
I looked away, staring into the fire, the flickering flames reflecting the turmoil inside me. The woods around the cabin grew quieter, the distant howling fading into a tense silence, as if the forest itself was waiting, watching. Elijah poured himself another cup of tea, his movements slow, deliberate.
You'll hear the wolves again,
He said softly.
but they only come when it's time. Not tonight. Not yet.
I nodded, though sleep was a long way off. The weight of his words pressed down, mingling with the cold dampness settling in my bones. Outside, the forest breathed, alive, patient, and merciless. The morning light crept softly through the narrow windows of the cabin, casting long, lazy shadows across the rough wooden floor. Outside, the rain had finally ceased, leaving the forest washed clean, the air fresh and heavy, with the scent of damp pine and earth. The world felt paused, holding its breath between storms, and inside that quiet space, I was still trying to settle into the strange rhythm of this place. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, muscles aching from a restless night. The lingering chill from the dampness had settled deep into my bones, and I was glad for the fire still glowing faintly in the hearth. It offered a small comfort against the vast, indifferent wilderness waiting just beyond the cabin walls. I shifted in my seat, glancing toward the old man, Elijah. He was already up, tending the fire with the practiced ease of someone who had spent countless mornings in front of its glow. His face, lined and weathered, showed no trace of the tiredness that plagued me. There was a quiet strength about him, a patience shaped by years of solitude. The silence stretched between us until I finally broke it with a question that felt almost absurd in the weight of everything else. Where can I, take a leak? Elijah's eyes met mine, unflinching. For a moment, the corners of his mouth twitched, as if suppressing a smile or a memory. Then he nodded slowly.
Down the path.
He said quietly, voice calm and measured.
You'll see the place.
I didn't ask for directions. The simple answer was enough, a hint of an invitation and maybe a warning. I stood, stretching my stiff limbs, and grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. The cabin felt smaller somehow now, the walls closing in with the weight of unspoken things. Outside, the forest beckoned, mysterious, vast, and unknowable. The forest path led me deeper into the undergrowth, the canopy thickening overhead until the world beyond was swallowed by green shadows and filtered sunlight. My footsteps grew quieter, cautious, as a strange sense of anticipation gripped me. The earth beneath was soft and uneven, moss covering exposed roots that snaked like ancient veins beneath the soil. I knew I was close. Ahead, the trees opened into a small clearing, and there it was, the hole in the ground. It wasn't a simple pit, but more like a shallow grave, roughly dug and partially collapsed at the edges. Leaves, twigs, and damp earth had begun to reclaim it, nature's slow effort to erase what had been left there. But nothing here was truly forgotten. I approached the edge and peered down. Inside, scattered beneath the thin layer of mud and rotting foliage, lay hundreds of objects. Personal things, small and large, broken and whole, each telling a fragment of a story I didn't want to know, but couldn't look away from. A pair of torn sneakers lay near the lip, their fabric stained and soaked through. The soles were worn thin, evidence of long treks and desperate flight. Near them, a rusted wristwatch, its glass cracked and hands frozen at an unknown hour, sat half buried in dirt. The face was scratched, but I could just make out faint initials etched into the back plate. A dented metal flask caught the light, its surface scratched deep with a name and date, barely legible after years of exposure to the elements. Further down, the unmistakable curve of a rifle stock peeked out from beneath a jumble of sticks and leaves, the wood splintered and worn, rust eating away at the metal parts. A weapon abandoned or taken. Amid the grim collection were fragments that cut deeper. A small, cracked porcelain doll, its tiny hand broken off, lay crumpled on its side. Its faded blue dress was stained and torn, a ghost of innocence lost. Near the doll, I noticed what looked like teeth, human teeth, yellowed and brittle, scattered carelessly in the mud. A stark reminder that these were no simple possessions, but remnants of lives abruptly ended. The air around the pit felt heavier, as if the earth itself mourned the weight of so many stories buried within. I swallowed hard and stepped back, heart pounding. I wasn't the first to find this place. And if these things were any indication, no one had ever left. The thought settled over me like a cold fog, chilling every breath. Here, in this pit, the forest kept its debts, and it was patient. I ran a hand over my face, trying to clear the image from my mind. But the pit called to me, an unyielding whisper beneath the surface. I turned away reluctantly, but the reality pressed close. This wasn't just a clearing in the woods. It was a graveyard, for lost souls, for forgotten travelers, for those who thought they could outsmart the forest. But the forest always won. I sprinted back through the forest, heart pounding, lungs burning with each desperate breath. The mud sucked at my boots, and branches clawed at my arms and face as if the woods themselves were trying to hold me back. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a threat. The cold rain had returned, drumming against the leaves above, masking my frantic footsteps, but doing little to soothe the storm inside me. The cabin appeared ahead through the mist like a mirage, solid and real, yet somehow unreal in the fading light. Relief surged through me. I thought of the warmth inside, of the fire's crackle, and most of all, of the rifle resting by the door. That rifle was my anchor, my only chance in a place where the wild seemed to close in tighter with every passing moment. But as I reached the cabin, breath ragged and muscles trembling, my stomach dropped. The rifle was gone. Where it should have stood against the doorframe, steady, familiar, there was only empty space. I staggered forward, scanning the porch, the windows, anywhere it might have been left. But no sign. It was as if it had never been there at all. A sudden creak behind me made me spin around. Elijah stood in the doorway, holding my rifle like a trophy. The old man's weathered face was unreadable in the dim light, but his eyes gleamed with a sharp knowing.
"You always bring one,"
he said softly, almost amused.
"Doesn't help, does it?"
His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a cold finality that made my blood run cold. I wanted to ask him why. Wanted to demand why he'd taken what I relied on most. But words caught in my throat, swallowed by a fear that was heavier than any bullet. Elijah stepped down from the porch, the rifle cradled in his arms, as if it were a fragile thing, yet deadly in its silence.
"It's not about the gun,"
he said, voice low.
"Out here the rules are different. The forest decides who carries what, who stays, who goes."
I swallowed hard, muscles tensing as the weight of his words sank in. He moved closer, the firelight flickering across his lined face, casting deep shadows that seemed to pull the room into darkness.
"You think a gun will save you. It won't. Not here."
My hands twitched at my sides, aching to grab the weapon, to wrest it back. But I was frozen, trapped by something I couldn't name. Elijah's eyes bore into mine, patient but unyielding.
"Better to accept what's coming. Fighting only makes it worse."
I stepped back, the walls of the cabin pressing in like a cage. My rifle, my last piece of security, was gone, and with it, my hope of escape. The cabin felt smaller now, the flickering fire casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like fingers, curling around the worn furniture and stretching across the rough wooden floor. I sat opposite Elijah, my hands resting on my knees, eyes fixed on the dancing flames, but unable to stop my mind from racing. The weight of everything I'd seen, the pit, the missing rifle, the old man's words, pressed heavily against my thoughts. Elijah's voice broke the silence, calm and steady, as if he were speaking of the weather rather than something that could end my life.
"You're not chosen,"
he said softly, his eyes meeting mine with an unsettling calm.
"You're just next."
The words settled in the room, thick and inevitable, like the slow drip of water in a cave. There was no malice in his tone, no cruelty, just acceptance. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it all. Next? Next for what? He shifted slightly, the firelight catching the lines on his face, revealing decades of wear and quiet burden.
The forest has its balance. It needs to take, to give. Wolves need. The forest remembers. I serve.
I looked up, searching his face for a flicker of doubt, a hint of mercy. But Elijah's gaze was steady, unwavering.
I serve the forest.
He repeated, voice low and steady.
I keep the balance between what is taken and what is left behind.
The crackle of the fire punctuated the room's heavy stillness. Outside, the distant howl of wolves echoed faintly through the trees, a haunting chorus that seemed to rise and fall with the rhythm of the night. I wanted to ask how long he had been doing this, how many others had come before me, but the words stuck in my throat. The cold truth was clear without them.
You're not here by chance.
Elijah said, as if reading my thoughts.
This place calls those who wander too far, those who carry weight they cannot shed.
The firelight flickered, casting his shadow large and monstrous against the cabin wall.
I've watched many come.
He continued, voice heavy with a lifetime of watching and waiting.
They don't understand what's happening until it's too late. They fight, they run, but the forest always wins.
I swallowed again, my throat tight. The hope I'd clung to, the chance that I could outsmart this place, began to slip away.
There's no cruelty here,
Elijah said quietly.
only necessity. The forest feeds, the wolves take, and I serve to keep the balance.
His hands rested calmly on the table, weathered but steady. I met his gaze, feeling a strange mixture of fear and reluctant understanding. This wasn't just about survival. It was something older, deeper. A pact between man and wild that I'd stumbled into without knowing. The fire flickered low, and I felt the weight of his words settle inside me, heavier than any rifle. The fire had burned low, casting a gentle orange glow that softened the harsh angles of the cabin's wooden interior. I sat hunched over the rough-hewn table, my eyes tracing the grain of the wood as my mind churned through Elijah's words. The silence between us was thick, broken only by the occasional pop and hiss of the dying embers. As my gaze drifted across the table, something caught my eye. A faint scratch etched deep into the surface. I leaned closer, squinting to make out the word carved with uneven strokes. Correr. The letters were worn, edges softened by time and countless hands tracing over them, but the message was clear. I knew enough Spanish from old trips hauling loads through Mexico to understand. It meant run. Run. The word echoed in my mind, sharp and urgent. Someone before me had been here, had carved a warning into this very table, a desperate plea left for any who might follow. My fingers traced the letters lightly, as if touching them could somehow transfer their urgency into my bones. I looked up at Elijah, who sat calmly across from me, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "You see it?" I asked quietly, nodding toward the carving. He met my gaze steadily.
Yes,
He said.
many have tried.
The weight of those words settled heavy in the room. If others had carved Correr into this table, it meant there was a chance, however slim, to escape. A flicker of hope stirred in my chest, tentative but real. Why didn't they run? I pressed. Why are they still here? Elijah's eyes darkened, the shadows flickering across his face.
Because the forest does not let go easily. It is patient. It waits for the moment when you believe you are free, only to pull you back.
I swallowed hard, the knot in my throat tightening. But if they tried, if someone dared to run, Elijah nodded slowly.
They ran, yes. But the forest always remembers.
The room grew colder, or maybe it was just the truth settling in. I stared back at the word on the table, Correr, and the question it whispered to me. Was I brave enough? Was I foolish enough? Could I outrun this place? Or was the forest's patience endless? The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken fears. I clenched my fists on the table, the rough wood biting into my palms. If they tried, I murmured, maybe I can too. Elijah watched me then, a faint glimmer of something, respect, sadness, in his eyes.
Run,
He said softly, almost a whisper.
but know this. The forest will be waiting.
The fire crackled once more, sending a shower of sparks upward. Outside, the distant howl of wolves wove through the trees, a haunting lullaby that both beckoned and warned. And as the night deepened, I felt the weight of that single word, Correr, pressing down on me. A constant reminder that here, in this endless wilderness, survival was a game of will and courage. And running might be the only choice. The cabin door creaked softly as Elijah stood, his weathered frame silhouetted against the faint glow of the firelight. The weight of his presence filled the small room, an unspoken warning lingering in the air. Without another word, he reached for his oil lamp, the flickering flame casting wavering shadows that danced across the walls.
I need to check on my friends.
He said quietly, voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. A mix of routine and inevitability. Those words hung between us like a shroud, heavy and final. I watched him step outside, the door closing behind him with a muted thud that seemed to seal the cabin in a sudden, suffocating silence. I was alone. The walls, once comforting in their wooden sturdiness, suddenly felt like a trap. My heart pounded against my ribs as the gravity of the situation crashed down. I couldn't stay. I had to move. Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and slung my pack over my shoulders. My fingers fumbled briefly with the zipper before I stepped out into the damp, chilled air. The forest greeted me like a living thing, its shadows stretching and curling in the moonlight, the distant chorus of wolf howls rising and falling like a dark symphony. I ran. Branches scraped my face and arms, mud sucked at my boots, and my breath came in ragged gasps. The forest closed in around me, the path blurring into a maze of trunks and tangled roots. Each step was fueled by raw instinct, adrenaline pushing me faster despite the ache growing in my legs. Behind me, the soft glow of Elijah's lamp faded, swallowed by the thick blackness of the woods. I dared not look back. The world narrowed to the rhythm of my pounding heart and the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. But the forest was unforgiving. Sounds I couldn't place echoed all around, a twig snapping here, a low growl there, setting my nerves on edge. The cold sweat slicked my skin, and a cold knot of fear twisted in my gut. The wolves were coming. They didn't need to howl anymore. I knew they were close. I pushed harder, stumbling over roots and slipping on wet stones, but kept running. Every shadow seemed to shift and loom larger. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn, to fight, but my legs refused. The night wrapped me in its dark embrace, and I ran, deeper and deeper, into the unknown. The night swallowed me whole as I plunged into the darkness beyond the cabin, every step a frantic scramble through the tangled forest. The trees loomed like towering sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky and stretching out like sharp fingers to snag at my clothes and skin. The air was thick and heavy, damp with the lingering rain, and the only light was the dim glow of the moon, obscured now by a thick veil of clouds. Panic surged through me, raw and unrelenting. My breath came fast and shallow, each inhale burning my lungs as I pushed my legs harder, desperate to put distance between myself and the cabin, and the old man who had taken my rifle. The ground beneath my boots was slick with mud and fallen leaves, hiding treacherous roots and uneven earth. I stumbled more than once, falling hard into the cold, wet soil. Scratches blossomed on my arms and face, where branches tore through my jacket, leaving stinging welts that only added to the chaos inside my mind. I had no plan, no direction, only the primal urge to run. Behind me, the forest seemed to close in tighter. The soft crunch of my footsteps was swallowed by the thick canopy, but the sounds that surrounded me were unmistakable. The wolves, their howls, once distant and mournful, had grown louder, sharper. Now, an unsettling silence hung in the air, a silence that spoke louder than any cry. They've stopped howling, I thought, heart hammering. That means they're close. The shadows around me shifted as if alive. I strained my eyes, but the darkness was impenetrable. No stars shone above, no moonlight to guide me. The trees blurred into an endless wall of black. I tried to steady my racing thoughts. Keep moving, don't look back. But the forest was a maze. Every path felt the same, every tree a replica of the last. Branches snagged at my hair and ripped at my jacket as I pushed through thick underbrush, desperation clawing at my throat. My hands were scratched and bleeding, catching on brambles and sharp twigs. A cold sweat slicked my skin beneath the wet fabric of my clothes. The weight of the darkness pressed down, a living thing that sought to swallow me whole. And then, faint whispers. Or was it just the rustling of leaves? A low growl deep in the shadows? I couldn't tell anymore. My legs burned with exhaustion, but I forced myself onward, stumbling over roots, crashing through bushes, driven by a single thought. Run. Run until there's nowhere left to go. But the forest held its secrets close, twisting paths and hiding exits. Every step seemed to bring me back to the same place, an endless loop of shadow and silence. The wolves were coming, and I was running blind. The forest closed in around me like a living thing, dark and relentless. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sound of my frantic footsteps. For what felt like hours, I had been running, pushing deeper and deeper into the woods, chasing a desperate hope that I might somehow find a way out. But the more I ran, the more the trees seemed to shift and twist, reshaping themselves into an endless maze. The branches scraped my skin and snagged at my clothes, the damp earth beneath my boots turning slick with mud and fallen leaves. My muscles screamed in protest, heavy and trembling. But I refused to slow down. Panic ruled me now, a raw, unyielding terror that burned hotter than any fire. And then, just when I thought the forest might never end, a shape appeared through the shadows. The cabin. The same cabin. Nothing had changed. The same rough-hewn logs, the faint glow of firelight spilling through the windows, the crooked chimney that whispered smoke into the night sky. I stopped, chest heaving, unable to believe what I was seeing. Was I caught in some endless loop? Had the forest played some cruel trick on me? Before I could step forward, the door opened. Elijah stood on the porch, holding his oil lamp. His face was calm, unreadable in the flickering light.
"Tea's still warm."
He said softly, his voice carrying the same unsettling calm it always did. I wanted to scream, to ask why I was here again, why no matter how far I ran, I ended up back at this cursed place. But the words caught in my throat. Elijah's eyes met mine, steady and knowing. There was no surprise in his gaze, only acceptance. I swallowed hard and stepped onto the porch, the mud sucking at my boots as I crossed the threshold. The fire crackled inside, warmth beckoning, but it no longer comforted me. Instead, I felt trapped, caught in a nightmare with no end. Elijah gestured toward the table, and I sat, exhaustion washing over me in heavy waves. Outside, the forest breathed, silent and waiting. The wolves were near, and so was the inevitable. The fire crackled low in the hearth, its orange glow casting long shadows that stretched and twisted across the cabin's wooden walls. Outside, the forest was a living, breathing beast. The faintest hint of dawn bleeding into the horizon, the air thick with a heavy silence before the coming storm. Somewhere in the distance, the wolves began to stir, their howls muted but ever present, a chilling reminder of what waited beyond these fragile walls. I sat across from Elijah, muscles sore and spirit worn thin. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on me. But more than that, a creeping sense of inevitability, a knowing that no matter how hard I tried, escape was slipping through my fingers like smoke. Elijah rose slowly, the worn rifle now resting in his hands once more. His eyes held a quiet sadness, a depth carved by centuries of pain and solitude.
"You need to understand,"
he began, voice low and steady.
"why I am here, why this forest holds me, and why it takes the others."
I leaned forward, every fiber of my being tense, desperate to hear, to understand.
"Long ago,"
he said,
"I was a hunter, ruthless, greedy. I didn't respect this land. I hunted wolves mercilessly, pushed the forest to its edge. But it wasn't just the animals I hunted. The Mohegan, a proud people, guardians of these woods, I brought them pain."
His gaze darkened, memories flickering behind his eyes like distant shadows.
"One day, I killed the daughter of the Mohegan chief. She came to protect her people and the wolves, the spirits of the forest. Her death was the spark that ignited the curse."
I swallowed hard, the firelight catching the edge of his voice as it dropped to a whisper.
"The Mohegan called down a curse, not of death, but of eternal duty. They bound me to this place, forced me to serve the forest, to feed it with those who trespass, to keep the balance."
He looked at me then, not with anger, but with a heavy acceptance.
"I am not a monster, not truly. I am the forest's keeper, its guardian and its prisoner."
The sounds of the woods grew louder, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the distant, haunting chorus of wolves awakening.
"I have lived through centuries, watching countless souls wander in, believing they can escape."
He paused, a shadow crossing his face.
"But the forest remembers, and it never lets go."
I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, the weight of his words sinking deep.
"You're part of this now,
He said softly, lifting the rifle with a steady hand.
and like all who came before, your time has come."
Outside, the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the trees, the world holding its breath between night and day. The wolves' howls rose again, sharper, closer, a dirge for what was to come. Elijah's voice dropped to almost a whisper.
This is the way of the forest. Balance must be kept. The living must feed the land that gives them life.
I sat frozen, the cold grasp of fate tightening around me. He was no villain, just a man bound by a curse as old as the woods themselves, caught in an endless cycle of life, death, and renewal. And I was the next to be offered. The night hung heavy around us as Elijah stepped outside, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder like an extension of himself. The air was thick with the damp chill of early dawn, the sky just beginning to pale in the east. A slow, creeping light, promising the coming day, but offering no comfort. The forest was still, but alive with the quiet stirring of creatures waking to the new day. I stumbled out behind him, exhaustion and dread weighing down every movement. My legs ached from hours of running, and my breath came ragged and shallow. Despite it all, a flicker of defiance still burned inside me. "Wait!" I managed to call out, voice hoarse. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way. Please, just let me go." Elijah didn't slow. His steps were steady, measured, as though the forest itself guided him. Without turning, he raised the rifle, leveled it toward a distant tree trunk, and fired. The crack shattered the stillness. The bullet hit its mark with uncanny precision, a sharp, clean strike just inches from a knot in the wood, sending splinters flying. It wasn't just a shot. It was a message, a silent warning. My heart hammered in my chest, and any thought of resistance drained away like water slipping through my fingers. He lowered the rifle slowly and finally looked back at me, eyes calm but resolute.
"This is the end of the road,"
Elijah said quietly.
"No more running, no more fighting."
The forest seemed to hold its breath, the distant howl of wolves rising, threading through the trees like a haunting chorus. We moved deeper into the woods, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the only sound besides the low murmur of the awakening wild. The tension was suffocating. Every snapped twig, every rustle felt like the final thread of my freedom unraveling. The sky lightened slowly, the first pale rays brushing the treetops, but the darkness clung stubbornly to the undergrowth. Elijah's grip on the rifle tightened, his face set in a mask of grim duty. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, heart pounding with a mix of fear and resignation. With every step, the inevitable drew closer. The forest came alive around us, the subtle shift of shadows, the flicker of movement just beyond sight. The wolves howled again, louder now, closer. Their song was both a warning and a summons. As we walked, Elijah's voice broke through the tension once more.
"Soon,"
he said, voice low and steady.
"you'll understand why this must be."
The cold air bit at my skin, but I was too numb to care. The walk was no longer about escape. It was a march toward fate. The clearing opened before us like a secret held tightly by the forest. Soft moss blanketed the ground, cushioning each step, while the thick, heavy air pressed close around us, dense with the scent of earth and pine, as if the very breath of the woods was alive and watching. The trees surrounding the clearing stood tall and silent, their twisted branches woven together like ancient sentinels guarding a sacred space. Shadows pooled at their bases, swallowing the undergrowth and giving the scene an eerie stillness. Suddenly, shapes emerged from the darkness. Silent and fluid, wolves stepped from the shadows, their sleek forms moving with predatory grace. Not a single howl broke the heavy silence. Instead, their glowing eyes shimmered like embers in the dim light. Hundreds of eyes watching, waiting, My breath caught as one wolf stepped closer, its gaze locking with mine, cold, piercing, unknowable. In that moment, raw fear surged through me. But beneath it was a deeper understanding. This was not mindless hunger, but something far older, far more profound. Elijah stood beside me, his voice steady and calm as he spoke the truth I was only beginning to grasp.
They don't want pain. They want offering.
His eyes swept over the pack before returning to mine.
It's not about hunger. It's about balance.
The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The forest demanded a price, a sacrifice to maintain the delicate harmony that kept it alive. The wolf's gaze bore into me, and in that moment, the weight of my fate settled deep in my bones. The clearing was no place of mercy. It was the edge of a cycle older than time itself. The moment stretched, heavy, thick, suffocating. The wolves moved in silently. No howls, no warnings, just a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Their eyes glowed like embers, fixed on me, unblinking and merciless. The first strike came swiftly, a blur of movement, sharp teeth sinking into flesh. The sound was raw and brutal, tearing, snapping, a ragged breath cut short. A struggle echoed briefly through the clearing, a chaotic clash of life and death. Then, silence. The forest held its breath. No more cries, no more movement, only the faint rustle of leaves in the cold morning breeze. The darkness deepened, swallowing the scene whole. A black screen, no answers, only questions. Only the weight of what had just passed. The story ended here, but the echoes remained, unsettling, unforgotten. The forest whispered in the gentle rustle of leaves, stirred softly by a light, wandering breeze. Somewhere deep within the woods, a faint light flickered, warm and inviting, cutting through the dense shadows like a beacon in the night. A new figure moved cautiously along a narrow path, weary and uncertain. The soft crunch of footsteps mingled with the quiet chorus of the forest waking around them. As the figure drew closer, the silhouette of the familiar cabin emerged, its windows glowing with the soft amber light of an oil lamp. On the porch stood Elijah, holding his lamp steady, a silent sentinel waiting in the dark.
You look cold.
His voice carried gently on the night air.
Come in. Tea's just about ready.
The figure hesitated a moment, then stepped forward, disappearing into the warm glow of the cabin. Slowly, the view pulled back, the trees closing in, the shadows swallowing the light, until all that remained was the endless, whispering forest. The cycle began anew. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you won't miss what's next.